Welcome to Gold and Blue, everybody, home of the college football fan. And don't forget about the checklist. Hat check, sunglasses check, Pepsi check, notes check, sources check, and thick skin is a check. And don't forget to sing gear to represent your team and yourself in my background. Send it to P.O. Box 360, Liberty, South Carolina, 29657, and get yourself a shout out. On to the next video. In case you're wondering, these are the teams that we don't have represented for the mini helmets. As you can see, we actually have quite a few big brands that's not represented here at Gold and Blue. So get your team represented here on Gold and Blue. Hey, you already know what time it is, so might as well sit down, brace yourself, and buckle up because you are entering the speculation zone. Right now, there's a lot of pointing of fingers as far as why the Pac-12 is in the situation that it's in. It is in a terrible, terrible position. We heard the deal that ESPN is offering the Pac-12 $90 million a year. That's $9 million per team per year, and that's at 10 members. I made a video earlier saying that could actually discourage the Pac-12 from expanding. Yikes, that's not good. On top of that, I had another Get It Gang comment that said if ESPN backs out of this completely, there might not even be a grant of rights and teams can leave whenever they want, and there wouldn't be a hefty buyout. But even if ESPN doesn't back out of this and they accept that deal, they're only guaranteed one game per week on linear cable because ESPN only wants one game on linear cable, ESPN, and the other game, because they only want 2 games altogether, would be on ESPN Plus. So we're talking about an exposure of 1 game a week for the Pac-12. Not good at all. So a lot of pointing of the fingers going around right now in the Pac-12. By the way, this will be a Get It Gang video idea. If you don't know what the Get It Gang is, it's basically a name that came up with for the group of people that leave video ideas in the comments of my videos. So if you think you have a good video idea, leave it in the comments section of my videos and I just might use it on my next video. So the first Get It Gang video idea is actually a super chat from one of my live shows the other day, and it's from Larry Pilgrim. We always appreciate those donations. It said, Oregon and Washington meeting with Big Ten screwed Pac-12. I never thought of that. That's actually a good point because think about it. USC and UCLA, they jumped to the Big Ten, right? Then we heard that Oregon and Washington wanted to follow them, and they actually met with the Big Ten. By doing that, they're basically broadcasting to everybody, hey, we don't want to be in the Pac-12 anymore. We want to be in the Big Ten. And maybe people took it as, whoa, some problems going on in the Pac-12. And if you don't think the networks weren't paying attention to that, they absolutely were paying attention to that. So that could be one of the things that's affecting this lowball offer from ESPN. Now, we also know that ESPN is having financial issues. That's also a factor into this. But I absolutely agree that Oregon and Washington meeting with the Big Ten, that has probably factored into why these networks are lowballing the Pac-12. And I'm sure that Oregon and Washington weren't really thinking about that at that point in time because I think they actually expected to get accepted into the Big Ten. Well, since they got turned down, now they're having to deal with consequences of that meeting with the Big Ten because now they're getting lowballed while still being in the Pac-12. Now, later on, they could still get the invite and be accepted, probably at a reduced revenue share, but still, direct consequences we could be talking about as far as them meeting with the Big Ten right after UCLA and USC announced that they were leaving. Next Get It Gang video idea is from Butch Shump. Says if they go Apple Plus and 100% streaming based on the production values currently with Major League Soccer MLS, the only way you'll be able to sit through Pac-12 games is with the team's radio option. Good old-fashioned trash talk. The MLS pregame is an absolute joke. They talk about everything but soccer for the most of it. Then speed through a few games at the end and nearly 15 minutes of commercials in a 30-minute show. Yes, that is bad production value. The play-by-play during the games has many of their commentators comparing MLS with English football. Others seem to be lost, like they are watching the game for the first time. This is what awaits the Pac-12. Well, if they do sign this streaming heavy deal, they need to make sure that they have competent commentators because it's absolutely right. If you have commentators that don't know what's going on or aren't familiar with the Pac-12, that's what I'm talking about. They probably need commentators that are either a part of the Pac-12 or have been a part of the Pac-12 or just are very familiar with the Pac-12 to call these games. Otherwise, they're going to look like they don't know what they're talking about, as I'm sure it looks like with these MLS games. So not a good sign right there. That's not a vote of confidence for this streaming deal. Jason Shear did say this. Pac-12 presidents have 100% been presented with the numbers, and they aren't close to good enough. Linear cable games a problem with Apple being the primary buyer. So it looks like the presidents know the deal, but the rest of us don't. But the fact that we're not hearing anything out of Pac-12, that's actually bad news. Usually it's no news is good news. Right now, no news is bad news for the Pac-12 because every day that passes by with nothing out of Pac-12, that just lets us know this is a bad situation for the Pac-12. and maybe they haven't even agreed to what's on the table, much less sign a grant of rights. Another Get It Gang video ideas from Mountaineer News 2 says, I've been hearing that Utah and Arizona State have been discussing a plan about what to do about the whole Pac-12 situation. In my opinion, it's probably how are they going to switch conferences. I'm not sure, but Arizona State and Utah are having meetings together, and there is an anonymous person that we do not know that is in these meetings. Think about it. So, yeah. So it could be that Utah is changing their minds. It could be that Arizona State is also changing their minds, because Jason Scheer said these numbers have been released. These presidents, these athletic directors, everybody involved, they have seen these numbers. And maybe now that Utah and Arizona State have seen these numbers and they've seen what type of deal it is as far as being streaming heavy, they're thinking twice about staying in the Pac-12. We could see Utah and Arizona State also join the Big 12 with Arizona and Colorado. I already think that Arizona and Colorado are going to go. But Utah has been strong in saying we're not joining the Big 12 because we think if we leave the Pac-12, we'll lose a lot of research revenue. Well, maybe everybody's changed their mind because of just how bad this TV deal. This is a bad situation for the Pac-12. You know what? That anonymous person could be Brett Yormark himself or a representative of Brett Yormark. Maybe Utah and Arizona State don't want people to know that they're going to have an in-person meeting with Brett Yormark, so they're listing him as anonymous, but Utah and Arizona State are really now thinking about getting out of the Pac-12 because the TV deal is just really, really bad when it comes to money, and the exposure is just as bad because only one game on linear cable per week. Next Get It Gang video idea comments from Darren Baird. By the way, you're going to have several Get It Gang video ideas on this one. I saw this from John Kurtz with the link. In this, he states and quotes Forbes and Deseret News that by adding BYU, that increased the TV revenue by $4 million per team per year for the Big 12. That the Pac-12 could have added BYU years ago, and they wouldn't be in the fix that they are in now. This could be a Get It Gang subject if BYU didn't add $4 million per team per year, and would the Pac-12 be in the fix they are now in if they added BYU? Also, what value do you think does the other new members add to the Big 12? Yes, I absolutely agree. I think BYU does add the most to the Big 12, and I trust these numbers to John Kurtz. They don't seem outrageous. They seem to be about right. I think BYU could add around $4 million a year for these teams. Now, the other teams that they add, I really don't think Houston bumps it up at all. In fact, they might have decreased it just a smidge. Cincinnati probably keeps it the same. Actually, UCF might have increased it a little bit. I'm telling you, UCF is a sleeping giant right now. They might not have the total TV numbers, but they're in the right spot. They're right next to Disney. Disney actually, I guess you could say, sponsors them. I don't know if that's the right word, but that's the word I'm going to use. So UCF is going to be a very, very valuable brand in the future. Mark my words on that one. That's going to happen. I really like this next Get It Game video I did. It's actually funny. Gary Wolf says, notice Robbins referred to him as Brett, talking about the Big 12 commissioner, rather than Mr. Yormark. So they seem to be on a first-name basis. And he's talking about the interview that Robbins, the president of the University of Arizona, did where he said, I talk to Brett all the time. Might want to check out that video when you get a chance. That way you know this reference. So yes, in his interview, he said, I talk to Brett all the time. So he referenced him by his first name, not Mr. Yormark or the Big 12 commissioner. He says, I wonder if he calls Kliavkoff George, LOL. Probably does. They're probably on a first name basis, but probably not a good relationship as of right now. Erwin Boyle actually responded to that. So this is another Get It Game video idea. Even if he does, it's all in how he says it. Robbins, hi Brett, how are you? Let's do lunch again on Thursday. Laughing emojis. Robbins, hello George, what's the latest? Rolling eyes emojis. And that's what I'm talking about. It seems like he's on a first name basis with Brett Yormark. Seems like a good relationship. And he's probably on a first name basis with George Kliavkoff, but it could be a bad relationship. There's a lot of friction going on between the presidents and the commissioner. And in fact, even if the Pac-12 makes it through this, George Kliavkoff might not have a job in the near future. Another Get It Gang video ideas from Robert Schwartz. Says, even a 3-year media deal with exclusively or substantially majority Apple Plus and or Amazon would be the death knell to those schools in terms of recruiting. Think about it. If you are a sought-after student athlete who needs exposure to enhance whatever NIL deal they can secure, why would you go to a school that necessarily limits their exposure and thus the amount of money they can earn? They wouldn't. Absolutely. And I talked about that on a previous video. If they sign this streaming heavy deal, it will 100% affect recruiting negatively. Not good at all for the Pac-12. Finally, the last Get It Game video idea of this video is from Big 12 Plus. He says this, GBD, here's a thought. if the Big 12 and or ESPN and or Fox were out to disband and pick apart the Pac-12, why hasn't George Kliavkoff and the Pac-12 sent a cease and desist letter to these three? Bob Bowlesby did this early on after UT Texas and OU Oklahoma announced they're leaving, and the AAC was talking about plucking the Big 12 schools. Your thoughts? Absolutely. George Kliavkoff's silence is speaking volumes. The presidents and the athletic directors are having to speak on behalf of the Pac-12 and showing a vote of confidence in George Kliavkoff. And George Kliavkoff is saying nothing. And you're right. He should have sent a cease and desist letter to these conferences, just like Bob Bowlesby did back in the day. You're basically saying, I guess if you get him, you get him. We hope you don't get him, but there's nothing we can do about it. He's not even trying to keep these conferences from getting those teams. That's a big time problem. Him saying nothing proves that he's a weak leader, and if the Pac-12 gets through this, I don't think he's going to have a job in the future. Great comment right there. I didn't think about that, so I'm glad you pointed that out, and I 100% agree. George Kliavkoff should have sent a letter by now saying you guys need to stop this. At least defend your conference. George Kliavkoff is not even defending the Pac-12. Let's think about that for a while. Y'all let me know in the comments. Number one, if they sign this streaming heavy deal, do you agree? Do you think it's going to affect recruiting negatively? Number two, do you think the Pac-12 is actually going to agree with this deal? Or do you think maybe ESPN pulls out and there's no grant of rights and these teams could actually start jumping without a hefty penalty? Number three, what's your opinion on what has actually caused this? I think it's a combination of a lot of things, but I want to hear your opinion on that. Number four, do you think Utah and Arizona State are actually meeting with Brett Yormark, and that he's that anonymous person that nobody's naming? And that Arizona State and Utah, now that they have seen the numbers, they want out of the Pac-12 and to get into the Big 12. And finally, do you agree the fact that George Kliavkoff did not send a cease and desist letter shows that he's not willing to defend the Pac-12, and if the Pac-12 does make it through this, he might not have a job for very much longer. That's all I got for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.